In this video, let's try to work with sorting. So let's say if you have a collection and you want to sort it, how will you do it? So first of all, I will create a list of values. I will say list of, I will say integers this time, and then let's say nums equal to new, add a list, right? And then we can import this. Okay, now one thing to observe when you talk about this type here, on the left hand side, there is no compulsion to add that on the right hand side, okay? At the start when generic concept came, it was compulsory for us to assign the values or to set the type on both the side. But after 1.7, they have kept it optional. If you specify on the left hand side, on the right hand side, you can simply keep empty bracket that completely works. Okay, so in this add, let me add some values. I will say nums dot add, I'll say 4. And likewise, let me add some elements here. Okay, so let's say we have these values here, and what I want to do is, of course, if I print these values, it will be printed as it is, and it follows the sequence as we have seen. So if I compile this code and run, you can see we got the values. Now what I want is, I want to sort these values. How do I do it? Now we have a very special class called collections. Okay, as I mentioned in the first video, we have a collection class as well, and this collection class has a lot of methods. One of the method is called sort. And in this sort, you can pass the array or array list which you want to sort. Okay. Now collection class belongs to util package. Okay. And then once you say sort, and after that, if you try to print these values, and let's say the output, if I run this code, you can see we got 3, 4, 7, 9. So sorting is actually very easy in terms of collection here, right? Now the thing is, what if you want to sort this based on your own logic? How will you do it? Example, let's say the values are 43. 31 and then 72 and 9, or let's say 29. So we got all these values, right? And then I want to sort them based on their last digit, not the entire number, because again, if you sort this value, it will be sorted based on the values, right? I want to sort based on the last digit. So I want 31 to be first, then I want 40, then I want 72, then 43, then 29. So this one first, then this 2, then this 3, and then this 9. How do I change a logic here? See, by default, sort will take its own logic, right? In case if you want to have your own logic, in that case, what you can do is, we can use something called a comparator. As you can see, we have a comparator here. Okay, how do I use it? So if you talk about comparator, let's try to use comparator here. So if I use comparator, and if you go there, comparator is basically an interface. Okay, so how do I use comparator? So I can say comparator comp is equal to new comparator. Now this is an interface, right? And we know we have multiple ways of implementing an interface. We can create a class which implements the interface, or we can use something called an anonymous interface, anonymous class here. Okay, this comparator works with integer, and I can specify that here as well, which is integer. In terms of anonymous class, it is compulsory to specify on the right hand side as well. Okay, we can use this comparator here, and in this I will define the method. Which method we have in comparator? So if you look at this comparator, we have a method called compare. Okay, that makes sense. We can use compare here. What's the syntax for compare? It is, okay, not this one. The syntax is int compare and pass the two values. So t is a type here. So integer. Okay, so I will say public int compare. And we have to specify two values basically. One is your, I will say int I, comma int j. See, when you basically sort the values, normally you compare two values. Example, let's say if I give you 4 values here, 2, 3, let's say we got 4, we got 3, we got 1, we got 6. If I want to sort this, at one time I will compare two values. I want it to be ascending order. So smaller value come first and then the bigger value go second. So I will compare these two values. If the first value is greater than second value, I will swap. So after swap, it will be 3, 4, 1, 6. Then I will compare these two values. Then it will be 3, 1, 4, 6. Then I will compare these two values. So this will be 3, 1, 6, or sorry, 3, 4, 6, because the first value is smaller than second value, to no swap. In this case, we have swapped it because it was a bigger value. Now, once you got 3, 1, 4, 6, we'll do this iteration multiple times. Again, you will compare this two. This will be 1, 3, 4, 6. Then this two, it will be 1, 3, 4, 6. Now, we don't have to do that. We don't have to compare the last two because in the first iteration, the biggest value comes at the end. So we got that, right? So we have to do that only 3 times. And again, for the next iteration, we can say 1, 3. I know this is sorted, but still we have to continue the iteration. First compare first two, 1, 3, 4, 6, and you're done. Right? So this is how basically you sort the elements. The aim here is when you sort elements, this is one of the algorithms for sorting. Basically, we have to compare two values and swap. That's basic rule, right? So here as well, when you say you're sorting, you have to just have to specify when to swap and not to swap. So when you compare I and j, if you say, okay, now we want to compare, and how do you specify that we have to swap? So if you return 1, it will swap. If you return -1, it will not swap. It's that simple. Okay, so what I will do is, I will check, and I want to check the last number, right? So I will check if, how do we get the last number? Oh, mod 10. If I mod 10 is greater than the j mod 10, in that case, swap. Else, you can say return -1. Okay, so this is how basically you specify the logic. And I can still see an error here. What is the error? The compare method is correct. Okay, there should not be any error here. Okay, let's see what happens. So what I will do is, I will pass this com object here itself. So I will say com, and okay, there's still an error. I don't see any reason to get the error. Did I forgot any colon or something? Things are looking good. Let's compile this one. Let's see what happens. Compile, there is an issue. Is not abstract, does not override. Okay, it is giving an issue with the compare method. Is it the right method name when I'm using compare? Okay, that's right. Okay, do we have to use the class names here? Integer and integer. Oh, it was because of the class name. My bad. Yeah, so we have to use a class name here, right? Because collection works with the wrapper classes. And now I will try to compile this code and okay, compile 2 times and run. You can see we got the sorted values. We got 1, 2, 3, 9. So basically what we are doing is we are changing the way it sorts the value. If you want to specify your own logic, we have to pass an object of a comparator. Now in this object creation of comparator, we have to specify the logic based on which you want to sort this. In fact, let me give you a challenge here. What you can do is, instead of creating the list of integers, create a list of string and sort the string array with the help of the length of the string. Okay, that will be awesome, right? Try that. This is how you sort the value based on the comparator. So what is comparator basically? So comparator is a concept or an interface using which you can specify your own logic for sorting. Okay, that makes sense, right? Now I will do something else here. What I will do now is, instead of having a list of integers, let me have a list of students. Okay, so what I will do is, I will get a class here called student, and let's say we have int age for a student and string name, and I also want to have a toString method so that I can print the object as it is. So I will say source action. I want to get a toString method name because I want to print the student values as it is. And let me also have a constructor using which I can assign the values to them. I will say source, I want a constructor which can take both the values. Okay, this makes sense. Let me remove this at override for time being. Okay, so we got a constructor, we got 2 strings. So what I will do now is, instead of creating a list of integers, let me create a list of students. I will say student here. And then, because that type of student, right? And we cannot add numbers now. I will say these are studs. To replace this with studs, or maybe let's have numbers. What's an issue? And then here, instead of adding a number, we have to add a student, right? So I have to say no student, and this will be value 1, or let's say we have to specifying age, right? Let's say age 21, and name is, let's say Navin. Then let me just create some more objects here. So let's say age 12, name is, let's say John, and then age we got here is 18. Let's say Padul, and we got age 20. Let's say this is Kiran. Okay, so we got this 4 student here with different age and different names. Now what I do is, I want to sort them. Okay, time in, let me just comment this section. I want to print the array list as it is, and let's see what happens. If you compile and run, you can see we got all the values. The only thing is they are getting printed in a weird way. I want to print them one by one. So we can use enhanced for loop here. So I can say student as colons nums, I know we should have used studs there. You know what I can do is I will replace nums with studs. Okay, this should solve the issue. And done. Okay, so we got some students and I want to print one student at a time. Let's see if that works. Compile and run. Okay, so we got all these values. Now what I want to do is I want to sort these values based on their age. How will I do that? In that case, I have to say sort. Okay, let me just try natural sorting. The moment you do that, it is not working. Can you see that? The sort method is not working. Okay, let me pass the comparator object. The only thing is now this comparator is not working with integer, it is working with student. So you have to say student now. And both this object, so again, we have to compare two students, right? So we need two students at a time. So I will say student and student. Let's say this is I and J. Now, how do we compare them? We are comparing their age, right? So we have to say I dot age is greater than J dot age, then swap. It's so simple, right? Since we have worked with the integers, it should work normally. And if I run this code, okay, so that we got all the students with the ascending order of age. We got 12, 18, 20, and 21. This works, right? So this is how basically we can use comparator and we can sort a student as well. But there's one more thing. Why we have to pass a comp here? Why not, if I just say student, why it's not sorting? It's because the student, we have not specified the logic for the student, right? Because if you go to the integer class, let me just type integer here just to see. If you go to integer class, you can say integer class implements something called a comparable. And that's why by default, the sort works with integers. Our student is not implementing comparable. So if you want to have a natural sorting, you can also implement something called a comparable. The only thing is this comparable interface has a method called compare2. Okay, so we have to define that method. So I can just come back here and say implement this compare2 method. This is the signature. Okay, and we are comparing this with a student itself. And let me say this is that. Okay, the name of the variable is that. I will tell you why I've said that. But now what I'm doing is I'm adding a method called compare2. And I'm implementing something called a comparable now. And then this comparable actually works with a student. We have to mention that as well. Now, if you go back, you can see there's no error now. So sort method does work with student provided you are implementing comparable. If your students are not comparable, how can you sort them? That's what it says. But then if you try to compile this code and run, it will not work the way we want it. You can see it's not sorted. Anyway, I'm not using compare2 now. I'm not using comparator. What I'm using is I'm using compare2 of comparable. So whatever logic we have written here, the same logic I have to write here. Okay. Now the only thing is we have to compare two students, right? One student is that, so we can say this is that. What about the first student? The thing is we are defining this method inside the class itself, right? So what we can do is we can say this. Remember this keyword, current object? So this dot age, the current object, the current student, we are comparing the current student with the other student. It's something like when we don't have a comparable and if we have two students here, we need a third person to compare two students. But now I'm giving this power to the student itself. They can compare themselves. So if I'm comparing with someone else, I'm this and that is that. Okay, and let's see if that works now. Compile and run. Oh, it works. We can see that we got 12, 18, 20, 21. So these are basically we can use comparable and comparator. So you have two choices. Either you can make your class implements comparable. If you don't want to do this, you can also use comparator. In fact, even if you mention comparable, you can still override the logic by comparator. That's your choice. Okay. One more thing before we close this. Let's say I want to use comparator here. If I pass comparator, and I want to reduce this code. Remember Lambda expression? This is a functional interface. We can use Lambda here as well. So what I can do is I can remove this entire part from here to here. I know you have to watch this video multiple times to make it work. I can put an arrow and we can put this curly brackets as well. One more thing, instead of using if else, we can also use a ternary operator here. So the same logic, I can just comment this part. I can say return I dot age is greater than j dot age, return 1, otherwise return -1. So instead of using if else, I'm using ternary operator. We can remove this part. Now, since we only have one statement and that to return, we don't need return, that is optional. We can remove curly brackets as well, and we can write everything in one line. Again, watch this video multiple times to understand what I'm doing here. And also, in the Lambda expression, you don't have to specify the type. You can simply say I and j, and your job is done. You can see that entire comparator went into one line, and that's why functional interfaces are so important. Let's see if this works. And what I will do is I will just remove this from comparable, just to see if that works without implementing comparable. Implement, run, it works. What is comparator? If you want to specify on which logic you want to sort the elements, you can use comparator. What is comparable? If you want to give a power to the class itself to compare itself or to compare its object to itself, we can use comparable there.